She slapped a 15-year-old girl mid-flight, then watched the quietest woman on the plane rise like thunder from 7 rows back. The first sound was a gasp. The second, a slap. Sharp, stunning, echoing down the aisle of Flight 2813 like the crack of a lightning bolt. Somewhere between the clouds and the California coastline, civility fractured at 36,000 feet. Alana Brooks had done everything right. She was early to the gate, her violin strapped snugly to her back, her boarding pass carefully tucked into the side pocket of her tote bag. She wore the hoodie her late mother had bought her, sleeves pulled over her thumbs the way she always did when nervous. It was her first time flying alone. First time leaving Georgia. First time representing her school and her mother's dream at the National Young Musicians Scholarship Showcase in San Francisco. She wasn't worried about the music. She was worried about being noticed. So she followed her father's careful advice. Don't speak unless spoken to. Stay calm. Be courteous. Keep your head down. Sometimes it's safer to disappear, he'd said, kissing her forehead at Hartsfield-Jackson. But promise me, if something ever crosses the line, don't carry it alone. She had nodded, but in seat 17B, her invisibility unraveled quickly. The woman in 17C had made it clear the moment Alana sat down. Her disapproval wasn't subtle. A tight frown when she saw Alana's dark curls. A glare when Alana asked gently if she could adjust the shared armrest. And a pointed sigh when Alana pulled out a granola bar and offered one, out of politeness. Don't eat that here, the woman had said flatly, shifting her designer scarf like it might catch the scent. Some of us have allergies and manners. Alana apologized. She always did. She spent the next 2 hours staring out the window, barely breathing too deeply. But when her phone buzzed with a text from her cousin, a silly meme, something harmless and sweet, she chuckled under her breath. It was barely audible, but it was enough. The woman turned. Her blue eyes narrowed. You think this is funny? Alana looked up, confused. Sorry? I've asked you to be respectful. I didn't mean to offend you. I was just… You people never mean to, do you? She hissed, venom tucked between her teeth. Always too loud. Too much. Too… The rest of her sentence was lost in the sudden rise of her hand. It wasn't a push, not a shove. It was a slap. Open-palmed. Across the face. A deliberate choice, full of history and hierarchy, and a belief that no one would stop her. The sound cracked across the cabin like a gunshot, and for one long, horrible second, no one moved. Alana froze. Her cheek burned. Her limbs went numb. All she could hear was the dull roar of the engine, a chorus of shocked inhalations, and her own pulse pounding in her ears. Every instinct told her, don't react, don't fight back, don't give them a reason to see you as the problem. Be still, be quiet, survive. But then, movement, a soft shuffle, a click of reading glasses against a seat back, the subtle rustle of someone unbuckling their seatbelt. 7 rows back, from 22A, an older woman stood. She wasn't tall. She didn't shout. She didn't brandish a phone or call for the flight attendant. She simply stepped into the aisle and looked at the woman in 17C with the kind of gaze that didn't waver. Sit down, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it rang with something ancient. Authority without force. Dignity without effort. The kind of voice that could settle storms or start them. The blonde woman turned, still hovering over Alana, defiant. Excuse me? You heard me. The woman in 22A took a step closer. Sit, down, and do not touch her again. Something about her tone made even the passengers nearest them freeze. The woman had no uniform, no badge, no title, but the weight of her words filled the cabin with an energy no one dared interrupt. Alana turned slightly, eyes wet, breath still caught in her throat. She had no idea who this woman was, no clue why she had stood up. But in that moment, for the first time since her mother passed, Alana felt like someone saw her, not as a nuisance or a threat, but as a child who didn't deserve to be struck just for existing. The blonde woman scoffed. She was laughing at me. No, the woman in 22A said, stepping fully into the row. She was laughing with joy, and that scared you. People were watching now. Phones were being raised. The hum of passengers turned into a low tide of murmurs. A flight attendant began making his way forward, face drawn with concern. "I've traveled a long way," the older woman continued, her voice still low but unwavering. "I've seen dictators fall and families rebuilt. And what I've learned is this: silence always protects the one with power, not the one who's been hurt." Alana's hands trembled. The woman, this stranger, turned to her with unexpected gentleness. "It's okay to be shaken, child. But don't ever think this was your fault. It wasn't." By the time the flight crew arrived, the tension had already shifted. Something unspoken had broken. The woman in 17C was escorted, grumbling, to a seat near the back of the plane. The crew apologized. Passengers nodded in solidarity. A little boy across the aisle whispered to his dad, "That lady's like a superhero." But Alana didn't feel like she'd been saved by a superhero. She felt like she'd been remembered. By someone who knew what it was to go unseen for too long. The woman returned to her seat, until Alana rose from 17B and followed her down the aisle. "Ma'am," she said softly, "would it be okay if I sat next to you?" The woman smiled, warm and quiet. "I was hoping you would." And as Alana settled into 22B beside the quiet woman who rose like thunder, she had no idea that the rest of the flight, and the rest of her life, was about to change. Forever. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, casting a muted glow over the rows of still shocked passengers. Alana sat frozen in 17B, her cheek still pulsing from the slap. She wasn't crying. She wouldn't give that woman the satisfaction. But her hands were clenched tight in her lap, trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. Beside her now, in the seat where moments ago a woman had struck her with the cold confidence of someone used to getting away with it, sat someone else entirely, Lillian Nguyen. No longer just the quiet older woman in 22A, Lillian had become a human shield. Her body, her voice, her presence had interrupted what could have easily been another story of silence. And now, seated beside Alana, she carried the stillness of someone who had seen storms much worse than this and survived every one of them. Alana turned slightly, hesitant. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Lillian said, smoothing the front of her blouse. "That's why I did." There was no judgment in her tone, no pride either, just a quiet certainty. Flight 2813 continued its trajectory westward, somewhere above Oklahoma now, the cloud cover below soft and unbroken. The passengers were quiet again, some still whispering, others pretending to read or watch their screens. But the silence wasn't comfortable anymore. It had changed. It held weight. The woman who slapped Alana, her name was apparently Margaret Ellison, had been relocated to the back of the plane, escorted by two stone-faced flight attendants who said very little but moved with purposeful calm. A few passengers had applauded softly. One man muttered, "Good," under his breath. But most had stayed silent, perhaps unsure how to respond, perhaps ashamed that they hadn't stood up first. Lillian reached into her purse and pulled out a small packet of tissues, offering one to Alana. The girl took it, more out of politeness than need, dabbing the corner of her mouth though there were no tears. "I didn't expect any of this," Alana whispered. "You never do," Lillian replied. "That's how it works. People like her, they count on your shock, on your silence. It's their favorite kind of power." Alana looked over, curious now. There was something in the way Lillian spoke, like every word had been carved from memory. "You've seen this before?" she asked. Lillian's eyes stayed fixed on the seat back ahead. Her voice dropped slightly, as if recalling something long buried. "Yes. I've seen it on playgrounds, in classrooms, on buses, in city council meetings. I saw it in 1979, the day I started teaching in Chicago. My accent was thicker back then. The principal told me not to let the kids hear it too much. Said it might make them nervous." Alana blinked. "That's awful." "It was ordinary," Lillian said with a half-smile. "That was the awful part." A pause settled between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. Then Lillian added, "But I didn't move here from Vietnam to be quiet." And I didn't survive 2 refugee camps just to be told I was too much of anything. Alana studied her, realizing for the first time that the woman beside her, this composed, elegant stranger, was built from stories. Some that had been endured. Others resisted. All of them still alive in the lines of her face. "Why me?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "Why stand up this time?" Lillian turned. "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone the world would rather ignore, and that reminded me of who I used to be. I couldn't sit through that again." Alana's throat tightened. She didn't respond right away. She couldn't. From the galley, one of the flight attendants appeared. James, his name tag said. He knelt by their row, concern softening his expression. "Hi," he said gently. "I just wanted to check on you both. Is there anything I can get you? Water? Something sweet?" Alana shook her head. James nodded, glancing discreetly at the camera mounted above the row, one of the newer security features on this Delta aircraft. "We've documented everything. She's being met by airport police when we land. We've already got statements from several passengers who saw what happened. You won't need to fight this alone." "Thank you," Lillian said simply. As James moved on, Alana exhaled slowly. "I didn't know people would care." "They do," Lillian said. "Sometimes it just takes one voice to remind them how." The hours passed. Slowly at first. But then, something shifted. Not in the schedule, but in the energy. The older woman across the aisle offered Alana a small tin of peppermint candies. A man in his 30s, wearing a Nashville Pride hoodie, leaned over and said, "You're incredible, by the way." Even a couple of teenagers, back row types in cargo pants and earbuds, gave her a quiet nod of respect as they passed for the restroom. Alana had never been seen this clearly by strangers before. Not like this. She and Lillian talked more as the flight continued. About their mothers. About loss. About how strange it is to grow up being told to stay small. "I don't want to stay small anymore," Alana said quietly. "You don't have to," Lillian replied. Alana tilted her head, as if considering the weight of those words. And then, as if to seal the moment, she reached for the violin case above their heads and placed it across her lap. "Would it bother anyone?" she asked tentatively, loud enough for the rows around her to hear. "If I played something soft?" There was a pause, then a murmur of encouragement. And so, with the gentle hum of the aircraft as her accompaniment, Alana lifted her bow. She didn't play loud. She didn't play for show. She played Meditation from Theiss, her mother's favorite. The notes floated through the cabin like a benediction, softening edges, smoothing nerves, connecting rows of strangers in a way no seat map ever could. By the time the piece ended, some passengers were quietly wiping tears. Alana looked over to Lillian, who simply placed her hand over her heart. They didn't need words, because in that moment, something had shifted in both of them, and they both knew. This flight had stopped being about where they were going. It had become about who they were becoming. The hum of the engine filled the space between them, but neither Alana nor Lillian said a word for the next few minutes. The slap may have ended, the woman may have been moved, but its echo hadn't left the cabin. It hung there, coiled in silence, tightening around the quiet stares, the occasional cleared throat, and the way people seemed to look at Alana, and then quickly away, ashamed of their own stillness. She kept her eyes forward, the warmth still burning in her cheek, but what hurt more was the feeling she couldn't name, the betrayal that no one else had stopped it. Not the man in the business suit across the aisle, not the flight attendant who had clearly heard the words before the slap came. Not the older couple seated one row ahead who had turned around only once it was too late. Only Lillian, this woman with silver hair and a spine that refused to bend. Lillian's voice broke the quiet first. "You don't need to explain anything." Alana gave a weak smile, almost apologetic. "People are staring." They stared at Rosa Parks too. Alana glanced at her sharply, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "I'm not Rosa Parks." "Not yet," Lillian replied softly, and the seriousness of it hit with a strange, unexpected weight. A moment passed, then another. Then the rhythm of the plane returned. People resumed half-hearted conversations. The beverage cart reappeared. But the world in row 17 had shifted. Alana turned toward the window. The clouds below seemed endless. She traced a finger along the glass and whispered, "This seat. It was for my mom. She was supposed to come with me." Lillian didn't interrupt. She waited. "She died last year. Breast cancer," Alana said, her voice barely audible. "She used to call me her quiet thunder. Said I had a way of moving the world even when I didn't think I was." Lillian folded her hands in her lap. And she was right. Alana swallowed, blinking fast. "This trip is for a scholarship competition. Violin. I've practiced for years. I saved for the flight myself after everything." She didn't need to finish. Lillian heard it all in the silence. Alana turned to her with a question burning in her eyes. "Why did she hit me? I didn't do anything." Lillian looked at her with the kind of gaze that carries decades. "Because some people don't need a reason to fear what shines." Alana didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. Later, during the beverage service, a flight attendant named James stopped by again. This time, he crouched slightly at eye level with Alana. "I wanted to let you know," he said gently, "that there will be officers waiting at the gate. She will be questioned, and we have several witness statements, including from the pilot." Alana nodded, unsure what to do with the support. She had braced herself for silence, braced herself to be the one who'd have to explain everything, only to be disbelieved. James continued. "Also, the captain asked if you're okay. He said he saw what happened on the forward camera feed." "Tell him thank you," Lillian said on Alana's behalf. When James left, Alana sat back and took a deep breath for the first time in what felt like hours. Lillian studied her and asked, "Have you ever told anyone what it's like to be you?" Alana hesitated. "Not really. I don't think anyone wants to hear it." "I do." And just like that, the words began. She talked about the school counselor who'd assumed she was at risk because of her zip code. About the orchestra director who never gave her solos even though she'd been first chair for 2 years. About the way people praised her articulate speech with a hint of surprise. And how even when she won things, scholarships, awards, applause, there was always someone who looked at her like she'd stolen it from someone else. Lillian listened. Not with pity, but with the kind of attention that made Alana feel like her words weren't just safe, they were sacred. Then Lillian told her own story. How she came to the U.S. as a refugee from Vietnam at 17, fluent in math but lost in language. How her teacher once told her she'd never amount to much with that accent. How she learned to master American history just to prove him wrong, then taught it for 30 years. "But even after all that," Lillian said, "there are still rooms I walk into where people assume I'm the help. Or the foreigner. Or worse, invisible." They sat in that strange communion, miles above the earth, trading wounds like postcards from lands they both knew too well. And then something happened. The girl across the aisle passed Alana a folded napkin. Written in shaky pen was a single sentence. "You didn't deserve that. You were amazing." Then, from 3 rows back, a voice called out, tentative but sincere. "Hey, that song you were humming earlier. What was it?" Alana blinked. "Song? The one you did after the thing. It sounded pretty. Was it from your violin?" Alana hesitated, then nodded. "Would you play something? If it's okay?" Lillian looked at her. "Only if you want to." Alana reached into the overhead bin, retrieved the velvet case, and rested it across her knees. Her fingers shook slightly as she opened it. The cabin quieted. She didn't ask for silence. It just happened. And then, without ceremony, Alana played. A soft, soaring rendition of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." The notes were not perfect, but they were pure, and they wrapped around every tension in that cabin like silk. When she finished, there was no applause. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that meant something had been seen, and heard. Alana looked at Lillian, breathless. "You reminded them who you are," Lillian whispered. "That's power, child. That's thunder." And for the first time since takeoff, Alana smiled, not with apology, but with certainty. When the wheels of Flight 2813 finally touched down at San Francisco International, the cabin filled with the usual shuffle of movement, seatbelts unclicked, overhead bins creaking open, passengers stretching limbs stiff from 5 hours at altitude. But row 17 remained still. Alana didn't move. Neither did Lillian. It was as if the gravity that brought the plane to Earth hadn't quite found its hold on them yet. Alana sat with her hands folded in her lap, violin case at her feet, her posture composed but not relaxed. Her cheek was no longer red, but the memory lingered under the skin like a bruise still forming. She had been silent since the music. Not out of fear, not even out of sadness, but out of something deeper. Reflection. Lillian noticed. "You okay, child?" she asked quietly, not leaning in, not crowding. "I think so," Alana said. "I'm just holding a lot." "That's what the ground's for," Lillian replied, offering the smallest of smiles. "To let it go." A soft chime overhead. The seatbelt sign dinged off. But still, neither moved. Not yet. The flight attendant, Raoul, returned to their row and crouched beside them. "There's a security team waiting at the gate," he said gently. "They've reviewed the passenger reports and camera footage. The woman who hit you, she'll be detained and questioned. You're not required to speak to them if you don't want to, but you have the option." Alana nodded. "I'll talk to them. I want to." Raoul seemed almost surprised by her steadiness, then nodded with quiet respect. "We'll escort you through." As they stood, a wave of something invisible passed through the cabin. People stopped gathering their bags. Heads turned. It wasn't about gawking anymore. It was about witnessing. From row 20, the man in the business suit who had looked away during the incident cleared his throat and stepped into the aisle. "Miss," he said, awkward but sincere. "I should have said something. I didn't. I'm sorry." Alana didn't flinch. She met his eyes. "Thank you," she said, and moved on. 3 more passengers stopped her on the way out. A woman who said her daughter was the same age. A teenager who pressed a folded sticky note into her hand. Just the word "brave" written in block letters. And an elderly black man who whispered, "You stood taller than some men twice your age." Lillian walked behind her, saying nothing, letting Alana receive it all. It wasn't about praise. It was about restoring balance to something that had been cracked. At the end of the jet bridge, 2 uniformed officers greeted them. They weren't stern or intimidating. They looked like people who'd read the report and wanted to listen. One of them offered Alana a bottle of water. The other knelt slightly to her eye level, not because she was a child, but because respect begins in posture. Alana recounted everything, from the tension in the seat, the slap, the way the woman had looked at her like a stain on the fabric of her day. Lillian filled in the rest with her even tone and unwavering clarity. The officers nodded, took notes, and asked if she wanted to file formal charges. Alana hesitated. Lillian placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's your call, sweetheart. No shame either way." "I need to talk to my uncle," she said. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," one officer said. "We'll provide the paperwork. You have time." The terminal buzzed around them. A world still moving fast. Lillian and Alana moved slowly toward baggage claim. Their steps synchronized not by intention, but by what they had shared. As they descended the escalator, Lillian said, "There's something you need to understand about what happened back there." Alana looked at her. "You didn't change that plane because you played the violin, or because people saw a video. You changed that plane because you didn't disappear after it happened. You stayed present. You kept your dignity. And you let people look at the truth, even when it was uncomfortable." Alana blinked. Her throat tightened. "I didn't feel strong." "That's the trick," Lillian said. "You don't have to feel strong to be strong." At the carousel, a tall man stood holding a hand-lettered sign. Alana Brooks. He looked nervous, eyes darting through the crowd until he spotted her. "Uncle Jay," Alana breathed. He rushed forward, arms already outstretched, and she collapsed into them like a dam finally breaking. "I'm okay," she whispered into his chest, though her voice cracked under the weight of the day. "I'm okay." Lillian stood back, giving them space. When Alana introduced her, Uncle Jay extended his hand. But then, without hesitation, pulled Lillian into a firm hug. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. "I don't know what happened yet, but thank you." Lillian chuckled softly. She didn't need me. Just a reminder of who she already was. They stood at baggage claim until Alana's suitcase circled past, and she lifted it off with both hands. She was tired. More than tired. But there was a steadiness in her now. A new center. As they parted, Alana turned to Lillian. "Will I see you again?" Lillian smiled and reached into her purse, producing a small notepad. She scribbled something on a page and tore it off. "Come find me in San Jose. I'll make you tea. And tell you about the time I nearly got suspended for teaching the Black Panthers in APUS history." Alana laughed for the first time since landing. "I'd like that," she said. And as she walked away with her uncle, the note still folded in her palm, Lillian stood watching until the crowd swallowed them, and only the echo of something good remained. The terminal was quieter now, hours after Flight 2813 had landed and its passengers had gone their separate ways. But the story hadn't ended with the wheels touching ground. It had only just begun to ripple outward. Alana Brooks stood in her uncle's apartment, surrounded by silence that felt oddly comforting. Her violin case was on the table, her duffel bag half unpacked. Her body still carried the imprint of the day's events, the weight of adrenaline, the ache behind her eyes, the mark that had faded from her cheek but still pulsed inside her memory. She held a mug of warm tea Lillian had insisted she make herself. Part of the ritual, the woman had said before they parted ways. Alana had followed her advice not out of politeness, but because something about that woman made her feel like following her words would lead her back to herself. She stared out the window toward the Golden Gate Bridge, half obscured by fog. Her mind replayed everything, not just the moment the slap echoed through the cabin, but what came after. The people who spoke up. The girl who handed her the sketch. The apology from the silent man. The security officers who actually listened. And of course, Lillian. Lillian, who had once been a girl too. Lillian, who had survived her own storms and found a way not just to stand, but to teach others how to rise. Alana had never seen power like that. Not loud, not angry, but still fierce. And it had done something inside her. Shifted the floor beneath her feet. Made her want to walk taller, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from a number saved only hours ago. "Lillian. Just checking in. Don't forget to breathe. And remember, the ones who hurt you want you to shrink. So, take up space, sweetheart. Take up all the space you need." Alana smiled and texted back, "Trying. Thank you again. I meant what I said. I want to see you again." Lillian's reply came quickly. "Then let's have tea soon. Real tea. With stories." That night, Alana pulled out her journal and began to write. Not about the competition. Not even about the slap. She wrote about a woman in 22A. About courage dressed in comfort shoes and wire-rimmed glasses. She wrote about the day she stopped asking herself why this always happens, and started asking, "What will I do with it?" She wrote until the sky turned dark and her hand cramped. Then she folded the paper, slid it between the pages of her sheet music, and placed it beside her violin. A week later, the news caught wind of the story. Not because Alana posted it. She hadn't said a word publicly. But someone else on the plane had. A clip began circulating. Not of the assault, but of Lillian standing in the aisle, arms steady, voice calm and commanding. The internet dubbed her the woman who stood. And then it spiraled. News anchors interviewed experts on bystander courage. Educators shared the story as an example of modern-day moral clarity. A well-known actress tweeted, "Be the Lillian in someone's sky." But for Alana, none of that was the point. What mattered was what came quietly. The DMs from kids across the country. some biracial like her, some with natural hair like hers, others who had never faced anything close to what she had, but still recognized something in her silence, that moment before she was seen. They wrote things like, "I don't know how you stayed calm," or, "I wish I could have handled myself like you," or even, "My mom cried watching that clip. She said thank you." And Alana responded to each one, not with speeches, not with advice, but with honesty. "It still hurts," she'd write. Or, "I almost cried on the plane but didn't want her to see it," or simply, "You would have done the same." A month passed. Then two. The competition happened. Alana placed third. It wasn't the win she'd imagined, but it felt like something better. Because in the lobby afterward, a judge approached her and said, "I saw that clip, and I saw you. You reminded me of why we do this." Back home in Atlanta, her father printed out a still frame from the video. Not of the slap, but of the moment right after, when Alana sat still, wide-eyed, and Lillian stood over her like a shield. He framed it and hung it beside her mother's picture. "This," he said quietly, "is power." Alana visited Lillian twice that spring. They had tea on a porch that smelled like jasmine and old books. They shared stories, some painful, some absurd, some sacred. Lillian told her about teaching kids who'd lost everything but their fire. Alana played violin for her, soft, winding melodies that held all the things she couldn't say out loud. On the third visit, Lillian gave her a gift. A notebook with a leather cover and embossed initials. A B. "For the things you still need to write," she said. Alana took it, hands trembling. "What if I'm not ready?" "You don't have to be," Lillian replied. "You just have to begin." And that night, under a sky with no ceiling, Alana began. She wrote not just about the woman who hit her, but about the ones who held her afterward. About learning that silence isn't always weakness, and that voice doesn't always need volume. She wrote about Flight 2813 not as a tragedy, but as a pivot. A moment when the world cracked just wide enough for light to pour through. A moment when she saw herself, not as someone broken, but as someone becoming. Not a victim, not even a survivor, but something rarer. A witness. And maybe someday, someone else will need to see her stand. Maybe it'll be on a train, or in a classroom, or at a dinner table. But wherever it happens, she'll remember the silver-haired woman in 22A, and she'll know what to do, because someone once stood for her. And now, it's her turn. To stand, to speak, to rise, and this time, not alone. In the quiet aftermath of what began as an ordinary flight, a deeper story unfolded. One not just of injustice, but of rising above it. Alana Brooks boarded Flight 2813 as a 15-year-old black girl carrying the weight of expectations, grief, and dreams. She simply wanted to arrive in San Francisco for her music competition, holding tightly to the memory of her mother and the hopes tied to her violin. But mid-air, a stranger's cruelty turned her journey into something else entirely. A moment of public humiliation, a stinging slap that echoed far beyond the cabin. And yet, what followed wasn't just tragedy. It was transformation. In the very seat where she had been reduced to silence, Alana found herself not alone, but seen. It was Lillian Nguyen, a quiet woman in 22A, who stood when no one else did. She didn't shout, she didn't threaten. She simply acted with dignity and conviction, cutting through years of prejudice with the power of one sentence. Sit down. Lillian didn't just protect Alana. She reframed the entire moment. Her calm defiance disrupted the narrative of who holds power and who deserves protection. Her presence reminded everyone that silence can be broken, and that courage can come wrapped in gray hair, modest shoes, and a steady voice. But perhaps the most important transformation happened within Alana herself. In the space of a few hours, she witnessed what true allyship looks like. She learned that injustice doesn't always arrive in dramatic form. It can be subtle, even dressed in civility. And she realized that power isn't always about fighting back. It's also about standing firm, telling the truth, and refusing to shrink. The lesson here goes beyond the plane. It's a call to every one of us to notice, to intervene, and to remember that the cost of inaction is often borne by the most vulnerable. Whether you're sitting on a plane, standing in a classroom, or walking through your own neighborhood, the world is full of moments where someone needs to be seen, heard, and defended. From Lillian, we learn that it's never too late to take a stand. And from Alana, we're reminded that even in the face of pain, dignity can prevail. Let their story be more than just a moment on your screen. Let it live in how you show up, in the way you speak up when it's uncomfortable, in the way you choose empathy over ease. Because the truth is, every flight, every day, every space we occupy is a chance to either look away or stand. If this story moved you, if it made you feel, reflect, or simply pause, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to share powerful stories like Alana's, stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what it means to truly be human. Together, let's keep standing for one another. Let's rise. Subscribe now, and we'll keep telling the stories that need to be told.